Hey there, everybody. Welcome to this week's eLearning Career Chat, where we talk with different folks in the industry about their career journeys and where they're at and what they're doing and all sorts of other fun stuff. This week, I'm so happy to have Melissa Milloway. Mel and I have known each other for years and years and years, and I feel like we kind of both grew up in the industry at the same time. We've gone to conferences and seen each other, and we've had the chance to work with each other a few times on helping plan some of the conferences in the industry. And I love all the stuff that Mel shares out there online. So welcome, Mel. How are you?
Thanks, Tim. I'm excited. I'm doing really well, and like you said, I think I've probably known you almost a decade now because
Oh,
we
it's crazy.
we first met in the eLearning Heroes challenges, and I remember, and I say this to you all the time, like I envied every entry that you had, and you did this one Star Trek one. I think it was Star
Yeah.
Trek themes, and that one is like ingrained in my mind. And I was like, how did he do this? I was like, this is amazing. So
That's so funny.
it,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's in my. I have that in my folders way deep down, and like every now and then I randomly open that and I look at it, and yeah, I'm glad you remembered that because I don't think anyone else remembered that stupid little demo that I did.
I remember because I showed people and I was like, I want to do this. This is what I want to do because it was when I was first starting to learn storyline, and I like really looked and like dissected like your examples to be able to learn it. And so that was
Oh,
it was very important to me. And I love that there's so many people repping Philly today because I know like Matt and I know Alejandro. So hi all, everyone that I know from Philly.
yeah, that's
My
awesome.
roots.
Uh, so, Mel, before we talk a little bit about the world of customer education, which I know you're still relatively new to in your current position, tell everybody a little bit about, well, I guess start by telling us a little bit about what it is that you currently do. And then I would love to hear, just take us through like your career and the history. And because you started out in Philly and then you were in Seattle and now you're in Austin. So you've kind of been all over the place. So, tell us all about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just start with what I'm currently doing and give y'all an overview of. Now I'm saying y'all because I'm in my
Yeah, right.
I never did that before. I'll give y'all an overview of like our team in customer education. So I work at a company called Miro. It's a whiteboarding collaboration tool. It's the best one out there, and I thoroughly believe that. I don't just
Yeah.
have to say that. And so what I do is I lead our academy, and so our academy is essentially it's academy.miro.com, and it's essentially a place where you can take asynchronous training to learn how to use Miro. So, how to use it for mapping and diagramming, how to use it to get a meeting set up in 5 minutes. So, it's all courses and also hopefully soon to be some other things. And that's the area that I lead. And so I have two learning experience designers on my team right now. And I'm also hiring for a role for certifications. So I'm also, in that role right now for certifications. And we can talk more about that later as well. But I lead the academy side of things. We have a head of customer education that I roll up into. And then there's three other people that roll up into her other than me. So we have our live events. So that's consulting, webinars, anything live. And Jen on our team leads that. And then we have another area called contextual, which Matt leads. And so that area is really interesting. And I think folks in learning would find that very interesting because it's like part of it's like electronic performance support, part of it's
Mm.
like in app type stuff. So, like animated GIFs, short videos. So it's kind of taking care of that more like just in time learning area, but also some other things. And then our help center. So our help center is obviously like a knowledge base where if someone has questions about like specific things, they can look it up and get answers. So kind of almost hitting like all of those like moments of need in very different ways when it comes to learning. So that's a little bit about what I'm doing today and the team that I'm on.
Good. Yeah. God, I so much I want to say about customer education. So walk us through before we do that though, because I have a lot I want to ask and say about that. Because my contextual awareness about customer education has an interesting story, and I find myself really envious of people who work in the customer education field for a whole bunch of reasons, which I'll explain in a moment. But take us back to when you started in Philly and walk us through. I always ask this of everybody who attends one of the who co-hosts one of these sessions, to kind of tell us about your career journey, because I think a lot of people who are either new to the industry or trying to transition into it, we were talking about this before we went live. They see where somebody's at right now and they aspire to do that for themselves, which is great. But I think
Yeah.
one of the things that oftentimes gets forgotten is, like, like you said, we've known each other for a decade now, and we've been working for a decade to be in the positions we're in. So it didn't happen overnight. So kind of give us the Cliff Notes version of your career.
I'll try to keep this short, but
Yeah.
there's something I'm so excited about that I want to share with people.
Yeah,
It's
go
not a
ahead.
big deal, but it kind of, I think it speaks really to my whole career journey. And so something that started probably even before I went into my master's program for instructional technology was I had this like really big interest from like the late 90s and early 2000s, really in technology in general.
Yeah.
And so like I've always been really just it's been a magnet for me, like trying new things and like tinkering with technology and seeing what problems it can solve. So I so something like I've been doing lately is 3D printing.
Yes, I've been watching that, and I love like the vase you made and the thinking person,
I
and
do my base.
oh, I love that. How long do those take though? They take like hours, don't they?
So this one I think took like around 5 and this one was like 7. Yeah. So it's
And did
yeah.
you download those files or did you design those yourself?
I downloaded those. I did design, I have very small like Miro logos
I
I
love
did as
that.
well. That one's gold. And then I have larger ones that our team is going to paint for an activity. But the reason that I bring this up, because
Yeah.
if I go back to like Y2K,
Yeah.
one of the things that I was doing a lot of was like 3D modeling. I was using this software called Bryce.
Okay.
It was a 3D modeling software. And I also hosted this like virtual chat server on this platform called the Palace. And I loved like thinking about like how can I create like this environment, or how can I build like backgrounds for my environment that I'm creating, which I did in the 3D software. And I then until college, like I did things like that, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, right? Like my
Mm-hmm.
background, my undergrad degree is in public relations.
Yeah.
Which I
Oh
guess
wow.
works for like social media stuff a little bit, but I knew I didn't want to do that. And I found myself in a class for our blog, which I got to be one of like the founders of our blog for our university. And I was teaching people how to edit our blog site using HTML and CSS. And um, my professor came to me and he was like, I really feel like you're so great at teaching people and using
Mm-hmm.
technology. And he actually, so this actually goes to like how I got into the field. He's like, I think you should talk to the folks at this program. So what I ended up doing was going to the open houses for our instructional technology program at Bloomsburg University, and I fell in love. And so what I'm trying to say essentially is like, what interests you? What like keeps you awake at night? What are you passionate about? And I think that's really I've been in the field. I've never been in any other field. Like that's what has kept me in the field, and that's what's driven me to like build my skills and learning how to use storyline or how to code
Mm-hmm.
or how to create videos or animations and things like that. And so after I joined that program, there's no looking back. And then that brought me to Philly, where I did an internship in Wilmington, Delaware at AstraZeneca in pharma. And then it just continued on. So I don't know how
Yeah.
specific you want me to get about all the different roles I've had, but I've had loads of different roles in the learning realm of
Yeah,
things.
no, you've been all over. I mean, you were in at Amazon and the Miro, and I love that. What I love about that story you describe, and with the 3D printing and the coding and the 3D modeling in your past, I was talking last week with somebody who moved from academia into instructional design. His name's Jim Brown, and he was talking about his. He used to teach theater, and he has a degree in theater education. And for a long time, I wanted to be a theater teacher. I was a big theater geek in high school. And what I find interesting about our industry is that there's so many people who fell into it in these weird ways. but they find, people like myself or people like yourself find ways to use their past passions, if you will, as part of what they do in instructional design or e-learning development. I mean, I think about, we were talking last week about how, when I design an e-learning course, it's kind of like the stage, and I'm creating a little play, and it's like the set and the scenery. And I also think about, like, in high school, I also did a lot of multimedia production, and I find it, doing this
Yes,
stuff
of
right now
course.
is like, it gives me a chance to do the stuff that I loved, even though it's in a totally different context, right?
Yeah, it's so true. Like it's so easy in this field to take like either what you're good at or what you love or both and like find a role in it. So I know there are roles in learning and development that wouldn't suit me, like wouldn't
Sure.
like because I couldn't live without the technology side of things. That's what really excites me in
Yep.
my career. Like I love problem solving, especially with technology, and I love working with people. So really there is something for everyone. It's just finding out like what is the best role for you in your career. And I'm constantly like that's evolving with me like as I go through my career. Like I wasn't a people manager before, and now I'm a people manager, and that's
Hmm.
something I really love and enjoy as well. So yeah, it definitely evolves
Yeah,
with you.
I agree. And I think I've talked about this before, about how I think so many people who are new to the industry or wanting to get into the industry feel like, or they hear that there's only like an instructional designer or an e-learning developer or learning experience designer, however you define yourself. It's defined by these really clear parameters where you're going to be doing needs analysis and you're going to do that and da, 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 da. And sometimes that's true, but the truth is every position in our industry, even if they share the same titles, there's such variety in terms of the scope of responsibility. Like you said, like for me, like I admit this completely upfront. Like I don't like the upfront part of instructional design. Like I hate doing needs analyses and all of that stuff. Like I want to do the cool stuff, like the development part of it, right? And there are roles out there like that. And on the opposite side, there are roles in this industry who are just doing needs analyses and stakeholder management and all of that stuff. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
So tell us, I'm curious to know. So you work now in customer education at Miro. Um, was customer education like on your radar prior to joining Miro, or like what was your awareness of customer, or when did you even become aware of customer education as a thing in our industry? Because it's something that for me, as I think back when I first actually became aware of it, wasn't until like 2015, 2016 that I start hearing more about customer education. So tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about that for you.
And I have like a little short story too.
Yeah.
I remember, so Tim and I were at ATD like planning committee, and the whole time the last one, I kept going, I think we need customer education sessions.
Yes.
I was like, there's this whole community out there, and like we're not hitting it here at ATD. And so I've known about it for a little over 2 years now. Like I feel like I've known about it longer, but I didn't really see like how what I was doing necessarily could directly relate to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard about it because I have a friend who, well, two different folks in the community, but one works at Facebook and is leading the Facebook business area in customer education. And I spoke with him quite a bit, and I really got to learn about what they're doing over there at Facebook. And I was like, wow, this sounds so exciting, so intriguing to me. Before I had been doing a lot of like work on a team where we were developing things like primarily in like Rise and Storyline and
Mm-hmm.
like video development and things like that. And I think it made sense for what we were doing. And I was really interested in like how customer education is much more varied. I would say and it's not necessarily like you're working with one authoring tool or like this is like your tech stack. Like it's much more based on like what are your needs, and like there's a lot more possibilities. And so that really intrigued me, just like the different possibilities that there are outside of kind of like the corporate internal side of things.
Mm-hmm.
um, so that's when I first heard about, probably like 2 years ago, to answer your question.
Yeah. I when I first heard about it, I was managing a team at the last place I worked before I started my business, and HR would send, I told the story before, but HR would send out these emails every month or every couple of weeks with internal job postings. And I was scrolling through it, and there was a position for an instructional designer. And I manage the instructional design team. And I'm like, I'm not hiring an instructional designer. Who the hell's hiring an instructional designer? And so I clicked, and I went and didn't Google it, but I went and searched and found out that the marketing team had an instructional design team. And I had no idea that this team existed at the company I was working at. And then I met with them, and there was a whole nother instructional design team. And that's how I became aware that they had a customer education team. And the thing about customer education, and I think it's evolving, but the thing I like about customer education is that it's this really cool intersection between marketing and a little bit of customer service, and of course, the instructional design aspects and multimedia production, and I think as I look at the history of from what I've seen with customer education, it used to be just purely marketing copywriters, but now I think there's more instructional designers getting into the field, because obviously you need things to be instructionally sound. But it's this really cool intersection between all of these different functional areas of an organization that are usually separate, and you're coming together to create this really cool customer-centered experience or product that helps people do things better. And that's part of the reason I like customer education, but also because they tend to have bigger budgets, so you can do a lot cooler things. I don't know.
I think it's the same with sales training,
Yeah.
like in my
Yeah.
past, like that was one aspect of that as well. But I do feel like having that instructional design background lends itself so well to customer education, and I don't know
Mhm.
that everyone who is in customer education does have that background, but it definitely helps when you're trying to really solve a problem. Like, do we need to create practice for this? Like, what's the most important thing that we need to cover in this course if someone only has X amount of minutes to do this? I think there's a lot of skills that instructional designers have that apply so well and allow you to focus on what's the right thing that we should be covering, like what is going to be the most useful thing, and then maybe what lends itself better to like a user guide or
Mhm.
knowledge base or those types of things. I think it's really easy to make those decisions. I don't want to say easy, but it's easier to make those decisions if you have that skill set.
Yeah, I think so. And I think um it's not it- like I was saying earlier, because it's this interesting intersection where you're not only helping people use the product that the company's offering. There's a little bit of marketing in there, and so but it's not just delivering marketing copy. It's not just delivering information. You're trying to help people figure out how to use your product, and then the better they can use the product, the more they're going to be promoters of it down later on to other people. um, and so you get to do all these interesting, cool things that I just don't feel like you always get to do with traditional L&D departments. So, in the I think you said 5 months you've been at Miro so far. What are some of the biggest differences you've seen between traditional learning and development for an internal audience?
Yeah, I was on another talk before with TechSmith, and
Yep,
so I'm probably just going to be repeating
that's
myself, but
fine.
I think that's the good thing about this is the consistency. So I think one of the biggest differences is in regards to like brand's very important. While like I was at Amazon, like we were like relatively stringent about brand because obviously like when you're working on a lot of projects, like you're going to be able to deliver things faster if you have like a style guide and like a
Hmm.
voice and all those types of things. But I've found like in speaking with people across customer education and my experience, like you're creating a customer facing product. So like
Yeah,
for your product essentially. So like you want it to match, like it should be a part of your brand. So like that is something that is stringent and it should be stringent, right? So that's I think a big difference from what some internal folks like have a little bit more leeway and creativity, like they may be able to use different fonts or different like
sure.
styles of images or those types of things. So I do think like that's a big difference, but it's a very welcome difference for me. I'm like a stickler for like I love like a really good consistent like course. Like I
Yep.
want to, like I don't want to have to guess where I'm clicking, or like go to a page and be like shocked and like be like, this looks completely different from the last one. Like, where do I focus? I think it really does help with like that cognitive load as well.
Yep.
So I'm definitely a proponent of that. And one of the other things that I spoke about as well before is like the metrics and data that you're looking at. So like internally for a lot of L&D teams, not all, I mean, you're trying to drive performance and save the company money. Like you're not necessarily like generating revenue or something like that unless you're doing
Right.
sales training. So I think like that's another difference for customer education. Like you are creating training that hopefully like leads to people buying more licenses or upgrading a plan or signing on, those types of things. So it's very different in that respect as well. It's not necessarily like you're looking for performance. Of course, you want to increase performance, but like you're not seeing what those people are doing internally necessarily at their
Right.
companies with your product or those types of things. So there's a different way you have to get to that, whether that's like through user interviews or other things like that or tests.
That totally makes sense. The other thing I was thinking about as you speak of data and how you measure it, how and I'm sure it varies from company to company, but based off of what you've seen so far, how do you determine where the training issues lie? I imagine you have access probably to way more data than you would otherwise, either through people searching for certain things on a help, on a help a knowledge base, or what are the most popular content that that company is posting on YouTube. But how do you determine, like, how do you prioritize those different learning needs?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm not saying it's easier, but I think there's a lot more resources to be able to
Hmm.
see what people need. So like yes, you might be aligning with like your company's roadmap and like what are they doing, because obviously you want to reflect like what new features are coming out there, like how are they going to help people achieve their goals, because your company is going to be really close to your user if they have a product, right? So that's
Right.
one way. But something else that's like really interesting, that my manager had brought up months ago is like looking at like job postings, like what skills are they looking for when they reference like
Mm.
maybe your product or something like that. So there's a lot of like kind of like creative ways to get to it and really get some data points that can help you determine what to pinpoint. So like, are we seeing a lot of people in this specific role like list your product and then look at that and say, okay, what skills would they need to be able to build to show that to then get a job,
Yeah.
um, in that area. So those are the two different ways. But obviously, like, like what are people like submitting ticket wise, like to your contact center or different things
Yeah.
like that. And is a course the right thing, or is it just that they need performance support in the tool and making those decisions as well?
That totally makes sense. So, speaking of that, speaking of like performance support versus a course, or I know you've talked a little bit about certifications, which I've seen. I know I helped TechSmith with some of their certification stuff, and I've seen other organizations do that as well. Talk a little bit about, for those people who might be interested in customer education, like what are some of the different modalities that you focus on? Because to me, it's so easy to think, well, it's just video content and you're creating, YouTube videos, or you're creating, mini courses within a university website or academy website. But what are some of the different like modalities you use, and what are some of the skills that you feel like are important for customer education people, um, or people who want to get into customer education?
Yeah, so I would definitely say like I'm trying to think of like different modalities. Our team is relatively new, and I think
Hmm.
like we definitely have a lot of plans to do more than video. But I would say we do a lot of video, especially because our tool is very visual. It
Yep.
lends itself really well to that. But there's some other things we do. So in Miro, we have boards, and boards are like that's your file for
Right.
Miro, and you can add frames to the board and shapes and sticky notes and all different things. So we actually create like practice activities in boards and then embed the boards in courses.
Oh, I love
And
that.
yeah, so that's very going to be very different from like what other people are doing, because obviously it's our product. So
Yep.
it's very different thing. But I think it's important. It's not necessarily like the modality of like video or boards or images. It's more so like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Like, is this person learning for the first time and they need practice? And
Mm-hmm.
then like starting there and then determining like what are the different ways we can do that. There's not necessarily going to be one right way.
Yep.
Maybe it's in a sandbox, maybe it's in a simulation, maybe it's like it also depends what you have available to you, right?
Sure.
So I don't know that that answers the question so well,
No,
but
I think that helps. I mean, I'd also like to know. So we're talking a little bit about skills. I saw you post. This was I don't know, a month. My sense of time is all warped. So it could have been like a couple weeks ago, or it could have been a couple months ago. I remember you shared a picture setting up your film studio that you guys are using. So I like that's a great example of, and this is probably going to vary from organization to organization, but in your case, like, did you guys just collectively use your existing knowledge, or did you have maybe a multimedia production person within Miro help you with that? Because that's, setting up lighting and audio and film editing. I mean, those are all skill sets that some instructional designers have, but not all. So,
and
yeah,
yeah, and this comes before my time. So we do rent a studio. So I really do not have background in like I've set up like small things like way back when I was in pharma. So like things have changed since then.
sure.
But yeah, we rent a studio, so we don't have to worry about setting things up. But like
That's nice.
our team is they're experts in like I don't want to like script writing, I would say is definitely like a really big skill. Um, Also like I don't want to say like positioning things, but like the way that everything's set up in the studio, like they're very good about like setting up the set, those types of
Mm-hmm.
things, like staging things. And then we do work with like multimedia folks on our team to edit like all of the footage, do like color correction, do audio correction, do animations and things like that. So I would say I think getting into customer education and the skills that you need, it's going to vary depending on like what your team looks like too.
Sure.
Like if you don't have a multimedia person, that might be a skill that you need.
Yeah.
Or if you can't contract out to someone who does that, then that might be a skill that you need. So it really depends, I think, on the team and what the team has
Yeah, I think that
skill
that makes
wise.
sense. Yeah. So let me ask you this before we start tackling some of the questions people are putting into the questions pod. I'm curious to know. Um, One of the things that I oftentimes do is I oftentimes will turn to some of the content that customer education teams produce, and I use it as sources of inspiration because, like, to your point, you're working with people who, you rent out a studio or you have somebody who's professionally editing it, and it's a great source of inspiration. And so obviously, outside of what you guys are doing, which has been fantastic, the stuff that I've seen so far, are there any customer education teams or content that you've seen that are really fantastic examples of what customer education teams are producing or that you get inspiration from? I have a couple in mind, but I'm curious to know if you mentioned any ones I
Yeah,
think of.
I think Slack's a really good one. So I like what Slack's doing. They've started kind of like a digital credentialing program as well. So that's really interesting seeing what they're doing. Obviously, I have friends at Facebook, so I like there's aspects of what they're doing that I like
Hmm.
when you take some of their like blueprint courses, like you can see they'll embed like scenarios throughout and different things like that really make like the learning sticky. And
Yep.
so I think like when you're thinking about one of the aspects and skills that could lend itself well to customer education is like instructional design when we're thinking about scenarios and creating that stickiness. And that's like a skill that we build as instructional designers that maybe someone who comes from like customer success or like another area and comes into customer education may not be as familiar with.
Yep.
So I look for things like that. And those things I think really make a difference for sure in the different customer education
Totally.
teams I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And
I've
how about
used
you?
so the one I've been geeking out about lately, and I send it to everybody every time I have an opportunity, is Webflow's customer education
Oh,
content.
yes. Yeah. Our team loves
It's so, excuse my language, it's so fucking good. It's so good. And the way that they, like, I need to get in contact because I've connected with their customer education lead on Twitter, and I've been wanting to like have them come on here because I have so many questions. Like I want to know, are they like, because it's such a great example of like humor and actually teaching you something, and it's produced so sharply that I'm like, you have to have got hired like somebody from Hollywood to help you script this, because it's like too good.
But yeah, I don't know why I totally forgot about that, but we're constantly gushing over their videos. They have such great videos.
If anybody, Webflow, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's a web design tool, and go out to, I think it's university.webflow.com, and it's just, or you go on YouTube, and it's just, yeah, I sometimes, I'm not even learning, I don't even use Webflow, and I just go watch it because I love just the content. I so appreciate the production value that goes into it. So, anyone who appreciates production
Hopefully,
value,
maybe they'll send you something for free after.
maybe,
Then you
maybe,
can use it.
yeah. Okay, good. Well, thank you, Gabby, for putting that into chat. It's really good. Okay, so let's go transition to some of the questions we have coming into the chat pod. And again, feel free, anyone who wants to submit questions, you can put them in there and upvote. So our first question comes from Kim. Kim wants to know, how is customer education related to the work that technical writers do, or are they related at all? That's a good question. What's been your experience with that, Mel?
I love this question because I've worked with so many technical writers in the past. So when I started at Amazon, I was in Amazon logistics. And so for anyone who doesn't know that, it's like the whole, well, at the time, I think was like the last mile of Amazon, where your packages go to a sort center and then they go to a delivery station. So the delivery station is like the logistics and the drivers that come and they get the packages, and people are sorting them onto the truck, or the, like, not trucks, vans. So I worked closely with technical writers there who were writing documentation on how to use like our app that the drivers were using. So they would scan the package and they would use the app to, like, leave the package at the door and all that kind of stuff. So they're writing that. And then I also worked with technical writers in engineering, writing documentation on how to deploy code and different things like that. So in customer education, like that could be a role in customer education, right? So if you're creating learning on something that's rather technical, like that might be a role on your customer education team. It's not necessarily like, I don't want to like say like, it could be really on any learning team, right? If you're developing technical content and you need guides or something for someone to reference or go through step by step, like you would have a technical writer. So it just would be one aspect, and it's not exclusive to customer education.
No, I've experienced in my last job working at GoDaddy, the technical writing team was a totally separate team from the customer education team and from the marketing team, but they all intersect with one another. And oftentimes, a lot of what the customer education team was doing, if they were teaching something technical, it was off the basis of what the technical writing team was doing, which was managing the knowledge base, and they were more closely aligned with the engineers and what was upcoming with the product. And so it was usually they were the first source of truth that we would reference, or that the customer education team would reference before creating content. But you're right, it could totally be a position within customer education in and of itself.
It really depends on the company, right? Like when I was at Amazon, like we had technical writers directly on my team, and like I would embed their documentation within like my courses and things like that. But I also had roles at Amazon where I was working with technical writers who were not directly like on my immediate team. They were on another team, like you were saying, Tim.
Yeah.
So it just depends on the company and how you have things structured, really. But I definitely agree, like whoever is creating courses or things, like, and if there's technical documentation, like you should be working together, because they serve very different purposes, and you want to paint a clear picture and journey for that learner and understand like why are they using this document, and then why are they going to my course, and like should they be integrated in some way.
Yeah. And technical writing is a whole nother area of an extension of learning and development that people can explore too, if that's the kind of stuff that you're interested in doing, right?
So true.
Yeah. Okay, good. Hopefully that answers that question, Kim. All right, our next question comes from Lori Brown. Hey, Lori. Lori wants to know what format is resonating with the customers. Video. Oh, I like this question. Video, podcast. We even talk about that. Live webinars, PDFs, documentation. So, what resonates most with customers?
Definitely video. We get when you say resonate, I'm speaking from like gets the most reactions and
Yeah.
like positive reactions. I would definitely say video, especially like what you spoke to, Tim, like especially ones that have the humor. So we just launched a mapping and diagramming course, and at the end of the video, there was like this impromptu dance session that
Oh,
my
I
team
love
had,
that.
and I was out of office that day.
Huh.
And so we got a lot of comments on how people like love that. Like people love connecting with other people, and that added humor. I think it makes things sticky, and it's an art to do it in a way that's not distracting from the learning, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
want to make the whole thing humor. Like you have to have those humorous moments that keeps people watching and listening, and that they're able to still do those steps that you're calling out. So definitely video. Um, Interestingly enough, when I was on the TechSmith video webinar thing,
Yeah.
they called out that podcasts get rank lower than reading things.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, they did a survey and people said like first they would want to watch a video, then they would want to read, and then they would want to listen to something, which I did not like. I was very shocked by that because I do enjoy listening to podcasts, but when you're creating training on a tool that you need to be able to see what you're doing, it's a little bit harder to do that through
Yeah.
something like a podcast.
I think the important thing, and this is less related to what resonates most with customers. I guess it would resonate most if it's fit for function, right? Like the podcast has to be fit for function for the thing you're teaching. So if you're teaching somebody how to make a mind map in Miro, probably the podcast isn't going to be good for that. But like you could talk about experts and techniques and have a great conversation. That might be more fit for function, right? For a
Yeah.
podcast. I just saw a tweet. I was there's a guy named Jay Klaus in the industry. He doesn't work in learning development, but he does a lot of stuff talking about freelancing. And he was talking about podcasts, and he mentioned something that I didn't think of before. The thing about podcasts is that they're not as easily discoverable as text-based content on the web or YouTube videos, because it's not it's not tends to be search engine optimization friendly. And so I think there's that other barrier of entry, that it's a little bit more work to go get the podcast than Google
Yeah.
something real
Yeah,
quickly.
it's definitely it definitely goes back to like that fit for function where like if you have an immediate problem you're trying to solve, like you may not want to scrub an entire audio clip to
Right.
learn about that or look through an entire transcript or even watch a video. Like maybe you just want to Google it and have the answer come up, or like have it just pop up in the software because the
Mm-hmm.
software knows that you need that because it's
Yeah.
like I know what you're doing. Here's how
Right.
to do this thing. Um,
Yeah. The other things you mentioned about like the impromptu dance thing that you had at the end of the video, that's the other thing I like about customer education that I'm envious of, is that because you're, and I don't kn- I this is my assumption, I don't know this to be true, but because you're working, it tend to be working more in collaboration with marketing people, and marketing tends to have a little bit more fun, and it's not so stuffy. It's not like you're creating a compliance course or something where it has to be serious, but like you get to embed more fun into it, and I appreciate that. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that that is a great aspect of the field for
yeah.
sure.
Okay, good. Our next question comes from Terry. Hey, Terry. Terry wants to know, how do you determine if your learning project is successful? So we talked a little bit about this, but can you go into a little bit more about how has your team measured the effectiveness of the stuff you're creating?
Yeah, so regardless of like being in customer education or not, like the main thing for me is like I want to start with a goal. Like what is my goal in mind? Like work backwards from a problem or a goal that I'm trying to solve. So like it could be like I want to generate like X amount of revenue, or I want to like drive down X amount of tickets or do something
Mm,
like that. So like I think so like at Amazon I was doing a lot of things like with our contact center, our employee resource center, and our disability leave resource center, and our COVID resource center. There's a lot of resource centers. And one of like the main like metrics that we would be looking at is like, are we driving down contacts, or are we decreasing like time on a call, or are we driving down like repeat contacts or different things like that? So for me, it's always starting with like, what are we trying to solve, and can we measure that? And that's how I would approach every project that I've ever worked on, is like working backwards from that. And then what are the things that are going to help us to increase performance so that we can then meet that goal?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's the same thing as what we would do in any other instruction. You start with
Exactly.
what are we trying to solve? Can we measure it? And then how can we impact it, right? And I guess it totally makes sense for customer education, reducing tickets of a particular thing. And that's the other nice thing, though, about customer education, is so much of what you're doing. This may not always be true, and I guess it could be true depending on where you're working in L&D and what you're supporting. But like, I just feel like everything, there's more data behind a lot of the stuff that you're impacting, right? Whether it's clicks to a page, or how long it takes them to do something within the tool, or contacts to the contact center, or whatever the case might be. There's so many more probably bits of data you can extract.
Yeah, 100%. And also because you're maybe working on like one product versus like if you're internal, like I know on my last team, we were supporting an entire organization. So one day we might be working on creating training on how to use a time and attendance tool specifically in Italy. And then the next day it might be like,
wow.
creating like a work authorization guide to help people fill out their I-9, or like, it was like something different every single day. It was a different project. So it was the data was harder to get, because you like every new project you have to figure out, where am I getting this from? Obviously over time, like you can keep track of that and reuse that, but there were constantly like new areas in our business being spun up. So every project was almost different before.
So do you feel like with customer education, do you feel like with what you're doing, it's more centrally focused, like the audience is consistent, and the things that it's all related back to the product? I mean, that's been my experience with L&D, is, to your point, I could think of 11 different things each day that we were focusing on that had no connection to one another. And that presented a bit of chaos in terms of figuring out what we prioritized, and then making time to measure it. But do you feel like what you're focusing on is more centralized? Does that make sense? Like it's more singularly focused?
Yes and no, because like what I was doing before, the similarity is that the audience is infinite, right?
That's true.
So we were doing a lot of product training before, probably almost 25 products at Amazon, and also processes and other things as well. And like the way that in which people use products is always, it's going to be different, right? And the approach that they take is going to be different. So there's like that similarity, but the fact that it's just one product, like I get to be so close and understand the ins and outs of one product versus 25, which is almost impossible.
Right.
So I think there's like that's the big difference for me, from the past to the present. Like the audience is still infinite because they all have different use cases and goals, but the product is the same. So that makes it a little bit easier, I feel like.
Yeah. Okay, random question. This isn't one that's asked, but I want to ask before I forget. So I'll fully admit, I'd heard people talk about Miro forever and ever and ever, and I'm one of those people. It takes a lot for me to go use a different tool, especially like when the tools I have are doing what I need. And then one day I was like, I need to make a mind map, and then the tool that I used to use to make mind maps wouldn't let me do it for free. And so then I remember hearing it was Alexandria Clapp from ATD. She constantly mentioned Miro, Miro, Miro. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to go check out Miro. And then I was a total convert because I loved it. I pay now because I needed more than 3 boards. But my question is, what is the most underutilized, or the thing that Miro can do that more people need to know that it can do? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah. And I don't know, so the thing, like, I'll bring up my sister.
Yeah.
So my sister is a teacher in New York City, and I was
Yeah.
like, you can get Miro for free if you're a teacher. Like, you just sign up and like fill some stuff out, and you can get it for free and like use it
That's
with your
awesome.
kids. And the one thing like I found like talking with like friends and family and things about Miro is like people don't realize like you collaborate live with other people. Like you can see their cursors, like
Hmm.
like you can do things at the same exact time. Like I can be editing a sticky note and you could be editing one right like beside me. Like we can all be doing things at the exact same time together, and you can do things before, like so people can be before, you don't have to even be on a meeting, like you can still be in Miro
Sure.
like at the same time, not even talking, just like working. And I feel like people don't maybe like necessarily realize that like how powerful like the collaboration is in there. Like you can bring in like Google Docs. Like I'll be working in a Google Doc, pop my Google Doc like into Miro, double click on it, work on that, like come back in, like change some things. I do all of my project planning. It's like my one-stop shop for project planning. Like everything is in the same Miro board.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing like I feel like people don't realize is that like powerful collaboration aspect of things.
I appreciate one of the things, little things. This is so stupid and simple, but one of the things I appreciate is if there's something intuitive that you normally do and you want it to do, it tends to just work in Miro. Like for example, I remember I can't remember what I was creating a board for, and I was like, oh, I need to get this picture in here, and so I just tried pasting it in there, and it just pasted it in there,
It does, yes.
and it just worked, and it did exactly what I thought it would do, and it wasn't like I needed to upload it and then select whether I was uploading from the computer or you know what I mean. It just worked really well. So yeah, I love that.
There's so many things. I'm learning new things every day. Like yesterday I was working on like a quiz and I was like
Mhm.
playing around with like my keyboard and I had a sticky note and I clicked option and the arrow keys, and like when you do that and you're on a sticky note, it will create sticky notes in like any way which you click the arrow. So like if you hold
Oh,
option on the sticky note and click down, like it will put a sticky note below the other one. If you go right, it will go right. Like I'm just like learning all these like random shortcuts that just like all of the time. There's so many things to discover, which is super fun and cool.
it's like little Easter eggs.
Yes.
Okay, next question comes from Z. Hey Z. Z wants to know, other than Miro, what other great practices for customer learning could you vouch for? Z, I don't know if you're still on. I don't know if I fully understand that question. Other than Miro, what other great practices for customer learning? So other than what you do at Miro, I guess is the question. What other best practices would you recommend for customer education and learning?
For customer education and learning. Um, Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think I already spoke to this before, but really, like, I think it is key to really map out like what is the learning journey for someone. Like, where are the gaps? Like, are you fulfilling like full competencies? Like, so when we're doing courses, something like we're
Hmm.
doing is like it's like this is like you go through mapping and diagramming, and it's like a full competency in mapping and diagramming. It's not necessarily like just like here's how you create a diagram. Like our course goes through like here's how to plan, here's how to refine, here's how
Mm,
to like it's much more than that. And so that's important, but it's also important to have like here's just how to do this one thing, like where
yep.
someone needs that one thing. So I do think it's like so important to understand like what are the user's goals and like be covering that across education, and that's regardless of it being in customer education or not. Like there are there are differences in customer education and internal learning, but a lot of the things are like that where it's like very similar. I'm finding
Right.
it's things you would do regardless.
Yeah, I think what I'll add to that. So one of the projects that I work on every year is I help TechSmith with building and designing their Snagit certification. And one of the things that I really like that they did in mapping out that learner journey is they acknowledge that how one customer uses that tool, Snagit, could be different depending on the context of what that person does. And so, for example, one of the things you can do in Snagit is you can create job aids. You can take some screenshots and combine it into a template and add some text, and you create a job aid really quickly, which is fantastic. But, creating a job aid in a corporate environment might look totally different in the context of what if you're a higher education person needing to create a job aid. And so what we did is there are different videos that teach essentially the same thing, but the context is different. The example is slightly different. So for example, rather than, I think the one example we use for a corporate person is like how to log into the report management system was a made up scenario, right? But for the academic person, it's how to log into the student LMS. Same exact end result, but like the context that's provided is different because it helps that customer better connect with it because it's delivered in that context that makes sense to them, right? I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. It does. It totally makes sense.
Yeah. Good. Okay. We have a couple more questions and we're down to our last 10 minutes. So let's try to knock out some of these. So John wants to know, when designing content internally, you have a good idea of the skill set of your audience. How do you design differently, knowing that your customer's experience level with your product will vary?
Yeah. I don't know. So I think everyone's experiences like in learning are going to be very different because when designing content internally for my audience before, I really wouldn't have an idea, like a clear idea of their skill set because every project we had a different audience and some of them would be like have been there for like 5 years and know a tool in and out and some would be so brand new.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really about creating that map of like who are our customer groups and like you kind of almost have to hit like the lowest common denominator first, right? Like people are not going to be able to get to the expert level unless they have like the foundational skills first. Like you have to have those foundational skills. So I
Yeah.
do think it's important to create those foundational skills and then build on that first, if that makes sense. Because without that, like people are going to be doing things based on like what they have learned themselves, which is not necessarily bad, but could be a
Mm-hmm.
blocker from people becoming an expert, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think we talked a little bit about this before. One of the strategies that I've tried to use, like for YouTube content, I can't remember the acronym, but essentially the saying is like, answer super simple questions. Like if you can create a video that answers a super simple question, that's the thing that people are typing into Google. That's the thing they're typing into YouTube. That's how you're going to get better traction with the video you create. And probably there's something to be said. There's probably a lot more that goes into prioritizing the content you create, but what are those things that people are most likely to Google about Miro and answer those questions? Or what are the things that they're going to the help desk for or submitting tickets to the customer support portal? Those questions are the ones you have to answer and
Yeah.
hopefully help them
It's
self-service themselves.
Yeah, it's so important to start with that data. I feel like to really understand like where are people struggling or what's really intuitive that maybe no one's asking, like because maybe not want to focus on that. It's like the whole fire hose situation. Like
Mm-hmm.
people, like you want to create something when it comes to learning that people are going to be able to use immediately and help them immediately and answer those questions. And the other stuff is just adding to the cognitive load, like the things that people don't necessarily need.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, we have two more questions, and these are both good ones. Let's knock these ones out. Joy wants to know, does customer education teams work closely with the product design teams, and any other teams does customer education mostly collaborate with?
Yeah, I would say, honestly, in my experience in talking with other people and like just my personal experience, definitely product marketing, but all across the business, especially like it depends on like what you're doing. So like if you're creating a course for say developers,
Mm-hmm.
like in things that maybe integrations they can build for your product, like you're going to be working with the team that is like maybe developer advocates or something like that. So like there are like these core teams that you're probably going to be working with like product or marketing, but there's also going to be a lot of other teams just like you would internally, like who are
Yeah,
the subject matter experts in this area that I'm creating content for, because maybe it's not product all the time, like maybe it's another
right.
area, but product could be a part of it.
Yeah, when I worked at GoDaddy, and I've seen this in a few other technology companies, and this isn't a blanket statement. I'm not to say it's true everywhere, but at least at GoDaddy and a few other places where I've seen this is they'll usually have somebody who's the product manager, and they are this real cross-functional person who interacts with the customer education team and the development team and the marketing team and the customer service folks, and they kind of help. They're kind of like the central source of truth for what's happening with that product and how all of the different departments have to come together to market it, create education content on it, support it from a customer service standpoint. At least that's been my experience when I've worked on projects that
a lot of cross-functional people, and like finding the right people and making sure the right people are a part of like that conversation. And like if you miss one critical piece like that, it could really impact the content that you're creating.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, good. Okay, our last question, and you're the perfect person to answer this one, Mel. Sarah wants to know, does Miro work the same as Google Jamboard? So I played with Google Jamboard, but Miro, in my opinion, is like way cooler.
I mean, Miro is Miro's product, so it's like their only product. So like what we're gonna do, I want to say we're the best because like this is our baby, right? Like so I would say like there are other whiteboard solutions out there like Google Jamboard, but for me, like in my personal opinion, like Miro does so much more than a lot of the other whiteboarding tools that are out there. A lot more features, and it's the sole focus. So
it's not like you're biased or anything.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not a great person to ask that to, because I
will say it's here's my complaint about Jamboard. If I want to go use Miro, I go to Miro.com. Jamboard, Google doesn't make it easy to get to Jamboard. It's not like you click on the apps and it's like there with your Google Slides or Google Docs. It took me like a good 15 minutes. And for a long time I thought, oh, is this only available to like teacher people? Or like I had to go to like Jamboard.google or something weird like that. So it's a cool tool, but Miro's cool. Miro does a lot of cool stuff. So not that this was about Miro, but can't help talk about it. All right, good. Well, let me wrap up with a couple things. So first, Mel, thank you so much for joining. And thank you, everybody, for those fantastic questions. If you want to learn more about growing your e-learning career or building your portfolio or learning storyline or storyboarding, check out the eLearning Designers Academy at elearningacademy.io. And then also feel free to join us in our free online community at community.elearningacademy.io. You can connect with myself and others in the industry. Mel, thank you so much for doing this. And where can people find you online if they want to connect with you or reach out to you about anything?
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So you can just search Melissa Milloway, and I'm super happy to connect with you. Also Twitter, Mel Milloway, and then melslearninglab.com, but may have a bit of an issue because my GitHub certificate or something is not going on. So if you go there, it might give you a weird warning, but I swear it's safe.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Mel. I appreciate it. And thank you all for coming today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.